Thanks for watching. Business Talks is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksMedia.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Business Talks is brought to you in part by STCU. Hear this program again on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com.
Welcome to Spokane Business Talks. My name is Matt Koffler. My guest today is Dan Wadkins. Dan is a partner at the law firm of Lee & Hayes, specializing in the formation of businesses from an intellectual property perspective, a financial perspective, and of course a legal perspective. Dan, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Great. Well, Dan, when entrepreneurs come to you, they begin the conversation around their intellectual property. Can you talk to us a little bit about just the basic forms of IP that you deal with, trademarks, patents, et cetera?
Sure, yeah. So it's really common for brand new entrepreneurs or startups to come to us and say, hey, I have a great idea, what do I do?
Sure.
Lee & Hayes is primarily an intellectual property firm, historically was just doing patents for just big clients like Microsoft. And now we're more of a full-service firm, but still with intellectual property at the heart of what we do, because IP is the single most valuable asset class of today's economy. So because I've worked at Lee & Hayes for 10 years and in the environment with all these patent attorneys, about 2/3 of our attorneys are still patent attorneys, I always look at things through the lens of IP. So that's the very first thing that we talk about. When someone comes to me and says, I have this idea or I came up with something cool, what do I do? I don't talk about forming an entity yet. I don't talk about having partners and getting an agreement between your partners. I talk first about what is protectable with regard to your intellectual property, what you've come up with. And so we go through kind of, just tell me about the idea, and then we talk about the four main buckets of intellectual property, which are patent, copyright, trademark, and trade secret. So kind of issue spot around those things, figure out which bucket or buckets apply. It's very common for multiple types of intellectual property to apply in any given business. And then we figure out, well, look, if you do have something that's patentable, let's go down that road first, because having a patent that for an invention that the market really wants means that you have some niche that you can protect. You have you're at the table, even if there's big boys that big companies that you're competing against.
Sure.
And so we usually talk about patents first, and if you don't have anything that's patentable, that's okay. There's a lot of companies that are very, very successful without patents. But every single business has some type of intellectual property. And so I like to go through that with new clients and explain, and try to figure out what type of IP they need to go after first. Because a lot of times, if you don't have anything that's protectable, then you really don't have a sustainable advantage over your competition. And it might not even be worthwhile to start a business anyway, right?
Right.
So let's talk about that first. What type of IP can we file for patent protection? If not, is there something that's protected by copyright? At the very least, every business has a name, so
Sure.
There's trademarks that maybe end up, your trademark could end up being your single most valuable asset for many clients, many companies out there. And then, of course, trade secrets. If you can keep something secret, your kind of secret sauce of what makes you better than, makes your widget better than, your competitors, then you have a sustainable advantage by means of keeping it secret too. So we always talk about that first.
So let's stay with patents for a moment. There are two types of patents, correct?
Right.
Could you spend a moment on those two, contrast those two different types?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you bringing it up. A lot of people forget about design patents. When we talk about patents, most people are talking about utility patents. It's those useful inventions. It needs to be, for something to be patentable, for a utility patent, it has to be useful, novel and non-obvious. Okay, so useful, that's kind of the easy one. If you came up with a new invention, you did it to solve a problem, right?
Right.
It's useful because it's solving that problem. Novel just means it's new. No one's ever done it before, okay, or come up with it before. And then non-obvious, that's kind of the tough one because, say you're applying some concepts from in your industry or in your niche that are applied in a different industry. A patent examiner might say, oh, well, if someone with ordinary skill in the art of creating widget A knew about the process they take for creating widget B, they would say, oh, well, that's obvious. I can just apply those things here.
Yes.
And so that's kind of why the patent attorneys make the big bucks is they have to argue with the patent office to overcome the obviousness rejections that often come. Now, on the other side of the coin, the other type of patent is a design patent.
Okay.
And design patents do not cover the useful components of a new invention. It has to be a new invention that relates to kind of the look of something. And so design patents are great to talk about and to use as a form of intellectual property protection especially for companies that have consumer products, right? So why is someone buying my product over a different product? Well, maybe it's because it looks cooler, right?
So think of an Apple iPhone, for example.
Yeah, the iPhone. I mean, that's the best example.
Sure.
And that's the big Apple versus Samsung
Yes.
litigations were mostly around design patents, actually, and trade dress. And so it's the look, right? And that's Apple's signature is we make things look cool, we make things look sexy, so that people want to buy them. And so designs are really important for companies like that. Also, design patents are usually a lot cheaper to get
Than utility
patents, and they're faster. You can get them a lot quicker, get something that's protectable.
I'm just curious, from an enforceability standpoint, does one tend to be easier to enforce versus the others if you have to defend?
Enforcing patent rights, whether it's utility or design, is a tough, very expensive proposition.
Okay.
What's easier, and I'm not an expert in this area. I do have people in my office who are experts.
Sure.
Sam Breeze leads our design patent group, and he's just a phenomenal design patent attorney. It's not necessarily easier to prove, but it's easier to actually get damages and remedies sometimes for design patents. And so there's actually there is a big incentive to get these design patents, and actually it's become much more important in today's economy, especially with the Apple versus Samsung litigations, and much more important for our firm as well. Yeah.
So I'm curious, an entrepreneur comes to you, you do this deep dive from an intellectual property perspective. Mm-hmm. Putting myself in the shoes of the entrepreneur for a moment, most entrepreneurs, especially very early stage ones, the other imperative for them is to get traction, to get customers, to spend money on marketing.
Right.
How do you advise them on this, what would seem to be sort of natural tension between the two worlds of, on the one hand, having to invest up front to protect myself, and on the other hand, I need to get customers, I need to get traction, I need to show that my minimum viable product, which we've touched on with prior guests on the show, has some traction that can be hopefully attract funding. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it is the biggest issue with startups, because you have just a limited amount of capital,
right?
And how do you spend it, right? To further your business idea in your company. So the way that we talk to our clients about that is let's kind of triage the IP first. Certainly, if you have something where if your business is one that it's not going to be successful unless you get some IP protection, especially if you have the opportunity to get a utility patent or even a design patent, then it's usually worth the money, to at least file something.
Sure.
Now, you can file on the utility side a provisional patent application, which basically can even be scribbles on a napkin and turn it in to the USPTO. Now, it might not be that useful, but then you can say patent pending and have a date saying I filed something. Really, a provisional is only a placeholder, and you have to file a full utility within 1 year. A full utility application within 1 year of that. And so, but there are ways, I guess the point I'm trying to make is there are ways to conserve your precious capital for a startup company, but still go down the path of seriously protecting your IP. So sometimes it's let's just do a little bit of spending on IP protection, then let's go out and test the market and get an MVP out there, and then we circle back around and do more robust IP protection after.
Okay, okay. When you meet with entrepreneurs and you're talking to them about intellectual property, do you find any common threads in terms of misperceptions or mistakes that young entrepreneurs are making in the realm of IP?
Yeah. So it's really common for people to just confuse the 4 buckets of IP.
Okay.
Like, I have a great idea, I'm going to trademark my idea. Well, no, that's actually in the patent world. So that's just laying out what are the 4 main buckets and how those things can work with your company. Is usually the biggest misconception. The other thing is especially for patents, huge misconception even for sophisticated business owners on what patents give you. Patents actually do not give you the right to create your invention. It gives you the right to keep others from making, using, selling, importing.
There's a defense of quality.
It's a negative right that it gets or that it gives you. And for patents especially, you actually don't have any rights until the government says you have rights, right? So you go through this whole patenting process, and then you can start enforcing. But that's different for copyrights and trademarks, which actually, you have protection right away. For a trademark, for instance, you have some common law rights as soon as you start using your trademark in connection with the sale of your goods or services, and so you want to make sure that you're that you acknowledge that and kind of act accordingly on it.
Well, we're going to pause for a moment, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the legal framework.
Great.
We're going to take a short break and come back in a little while and talk about the legalities of creating a business. Stay tuned.
I'm Nikki Butler, and I'm a regional manager for STCU. My lunch buddy is Nicole.
I'm Brandy Schloss. I'm a regional manager at STCU. My lunch buddy is Angelina. She's grown up with me. I've grown up with her. To see her graduate will be a lot of fun.
Brandy and I have been lunch buddies since the girls were in 2nd grade. It's great that STCU provides me with the opportunity to be part of Reach for the Future. We are committed to the children. We're committed to our community. I'm Nikki.
I'm Brandy.
And STCU is here for good.
O'Brien Logistics would like to
Welcome back to Spokane Business Talks. Our guest is Dan Wadkins, and we're going to continue and talk a little bit about the legal constructs of a business and the various alternative entrepreneurs have. I think the most popular route most take, I think, are LLCs, but there's also C Corps. There's all sorts of different iterations. Can you talk a little bit about the most common ones that you deal with, and perhaps contrast them with alternatives?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. So my practice, not only do I practice in the area of intellectual property. I'm not a patent attorney. I do trademarks and IP transactions mostly, and trade secret and copyright stuff. But really the core of my business is working with startups on the corporate and securities side. So starting those entities that you're talking about, and then helping them to raise money and be successful in general. So when it comes to the time to form an entity, the conversation I usually have is, tell me about your goals and your plans. First of all, do you need to raise money from outside investors, or can you just bootstrap it? If they say, well, yes, I need to attract outside investment, then that normally brings us down the corporation path, because the corporation has required corporate formalities that investors like a board of directors, okay?
Governance mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly, and shareholder protections and those type of things. But if you say, no, you know what, it's just going to be, me and my cousin or me and my brother starting a business, and it's always going to be kind of closely held, more of a mom and pop type of a thing, lifestyle business, then normally the LLC is the entity of choice, okay? And so in my world, I usually operate just either an LLC or a corporation, and those are usually, the entities of choice. Now, for partnership or limited partnership, those are used for investment funds and real estate, and sometimes and those type of things. But usually, LLC and corporation are really what we're talking about.
One of the main advantages of the corporate form is to essentially protect your personal assets from separate your personal assets from the corporate assets. And I've read, and I don't even know if it's true, but supposedly that the corporate veil, as they refer to it, has that used to be viewed as ironclad is no longer. Can you give us your take, whether it's, let's just stay with LLC since they're so popular these days. Does it still, is it still as ironclad as it once was, or are entities able to, or individuals able to pierce it and get through the corporation and get to you personally these days?
Well, it's a really good question, because the main reason, for the first primary reason for creating an entity, a limited liability entity, whether it's a corporation or an LLC, is to protect your personal assets.
Exactly.
Right? And so it is a big issue. LLCs, a lot of people use those because they have supreme flexibility. Right? You can call yourself anything you want. You don't have to have a board of directors or whatever. Usually it's a manager that's running the company. But LLCs are so theoretically, the corporate protection, the limited liability protection for LLCs should be and is under the law equal to a corporation. Okay. The reason why people might get into issues with LLCs is they are not respecting the separate entity, that corporate, that separate LLC entity. They're treating it more like their own personal piggy bank, and so it's a tough one, because on the one hand, LLCs give you supreme flexibility, and you can structure it any way you want with the operating agreement, pretty much, and do a lot of different things that you can't or shouldn't do with a corporation.
Yes.
But you have to respect it still as a separate entity. Keep the books separate from your own. Make sure that if you are paying yourself out of that entity, hopefully you have a good accountant, and your accountant can advise you on is it an owner draw, or are we taking it as in the form of a salary, or what does that look like? And as long as you respect that corporate entity and keep things separate from your own personal finances, then you should be able to still have that limited liability protection.
Okay. Let me just ask a quick follow-up question. I know many people, for example, use LLCs in real estate.
Sure. And
I've met some people who don't want anything to do with LLCs, and they say, I'm just going to carry umbrella insurance.
Okay.
And I've never looked at them as mutually exclusive. I think it's good to have both. That's my personal opinion.
Yes.
I'm curious from a legal standpoint, if someone came to you and said, I have umbrella, I don't have to worry about forming an LLC.
Yeah.
Where's the flaw, if any, in that logic?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the business insurance is very important. Okay, so you should definitely still have business insurance, whether you're a sole proprietor, general partnership, whatever, LLC, corporation. You need to have business insurance. But the forming an LLC is actually pretty cheap and easy. Okay, so you can look at it as one of the cheapest forms of insurance, right, of protecting your own personal assets.
That's exactly how I see it.
Yeah.
My insurance agent doesn't like when I say that, but I totally agree with you.
Yeah, so the real response is, why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you? And, I mean, forming the LLC, it's like $200 with the state, and you can form it. Now, we always, recommend you use an attorney and you draft an operating agreement, for your entity, even if it's a sole owner, okay, sole member LLC. You know, it's something that all businesses should do, because why not?
Let me just stay on this a moment further. I've also heard that the LLC protections, if you will, vary by state. I've heard of people creating their LLCs now in Nevada and Wyoming. What are some of the motivations for doing that? And I guess for purposes of this program and for our audience, is Washington, does it offer sufficient protections, or should people be looking at domiciling in a different state?
It's a good question. It's one that we get often. So corporations and LLCs, business entities, are controlled. They are fictions of state law. Okay, they are formed because of state law, not federal law. So each state does have different laws, sometimes varying in different ways. But Washington's law is a good one, both for LLCs and business corporations. And what we tell people is, you know, why do you feel the need to go to Nevada or Delaware or wherever? And so we need to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it comes down to just a perception thing. Okay.
Okay.
And so when I'm talking to my clients that are kind of emerging growth startups that need to attract outside investment, Delaware sometimes makes sense. The reason why Delaware might make sense is because your investors, or you're going down the VC, the venture capital route, and the more sophisticated investors are just not familiar with Washington law or comfortable with Washington law.
But they're all familiar with Delaware law.
It's kind of like a warm blanket for these investors, right, to do Delaware. And so we can do Delaware. But you have to remember that if you're doing business in Washington, but you are a Delaware or a Nevada or any other state formed your entity in any of those other states, you're going to have to pay two states all of a sudden. Okay, you have to pay Delaware for forming the entity and for their franchise taxes, and then you have to pay the state of Washington to do business as a foreign entity in Washington. And so that's something that people normally don't realize. And what we tell our startups that are looking to go raise money, if they want to go to Delaware, you need to expect to spend a minimum of $1,000 per year extra just to be a Delaware corporation.
So with the time we have remaining, I want to ask you a quick question on financing. An entrepreneur comes to you, they're looking to raise capital, there's debt and there's equity. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how do you think through the appropriate choice when advising the entrepreneur? Yeah,
that's a really good question. So it all goes back to, what are your goals? What are your plans?
Sure.
You know, where do you see the company in a year? Where do you see the company in 5 years? If you blew the door off of things, where do you see it in 10 years? And then what's it going to take to get there, right?
Okay.
There's no question that if a company can bootstrap and not sell equity in their company or dilute their ownership interest, they should bootstrap. Okay, if they can go straight to the market and get revenue and fuel their growth through revenue, do that. Okay, but even with companies that can do that, sometimes they say, well, look, if we don't grow fast, then competitors are going to come in and we're not going to reach our goals. We need to add fuel to the fire by taking on outside investment and really grow quickly. So once we have that conversation, we come up with a number. How much do you need to raise in the next couple months, in the next 6 months, a year, 5 years, whatever? And then that will kind of take us down the different financing paths. For startups, there are opportunities to get non-dilutive financing through loans of, for instance, Ignite Northwest has a loan fund that with good favorable terms. Mind to Market is a dilutive. It's a equity financing, but it's a very attractive, safe investment, is what it's called. Simple agreement for future equity. That's very company friendly, entrepreneur friendly, and so we kind of talk through these different opportunities. If an entrepreneur is not confident that they can go attract outside investors, then going down that path isn't going to be useful. So let's figure out a different path.
Right.
And sometimes grants, or especially for student groups, let's do a business plan competition. Let's get some non-dilutive
Right.
equity, and all of a sudden you have $10,000. I can pay for a patent application,
Yes.
and those type of things. So you need to still explore all those things, but with the long-term goals of the company in mind.
Right. Dan, as we wrap up, for those aspiring entrepreneurs in our audience, how can they reach you?
So you can go on our website, leehays.com. My email address is dwadkins, DWADKINS, at leehays.com.
Yeah.
So our numbers on the website, or shoot me an email. Happy to talk to anyone, and I really appreciate being in the Spokane community, working with Spokane businesses as much as I can, and helping to kind of keep the economy rolling here in Spokane, because this is where I live, this is where I want my kids to eventually live, and want to keep things rolling in the right direction.
And you do a great job of it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
And thank you for being our guest today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this week's edition of Spokane Business Talks. I'm Matt Koffler, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for watching. Business Talks is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksMedia.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Business Talks is brought to you in part by STCU and O'Brien Logistics. Ask Kent a question, recommend a guest, or hear this program again on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com.